And even actually just, I spoke to a source within the Canadian Border Agency not that long ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and he was telling me that they're working on an operation that has to do with border agents being paid off in the United States and in Mexico to get people into Canada. So older Indian men who have run the drug trade and criminal organizations in Canada for years. And now they've teamed up with the cartels. And the flow of the precursors is easily coming into the port of Vancouver because, there are a lot of people of Indian descent who work at the port who have ties or family members with these gangs that are working directly with the cartels. And the precursors that are coming from China, there are so many shipments coming from China, and there's a massive Chinese population in Canada, and particularly in the West Coast. And so it's really like this multinational collaboration. If you really think about it, these people are collaborating better than North America as a whole, in a way, to run this organization, this criminal ring. And they are moving fentanyl into the United States. And I think that this is going to be amped up. If you look at statistics, and a lot of people will argue, the flow of fentanyl from Canada into the United States is nothing compared to the flow of fentanyl from Mexico into the United States. But when I spoke with my source from the cartel who was operating in Canada, he said that it fluctuates the amount that they are moving. And that's because Canadian Border Patrol will flag certain shipments at different times. It comes in waves. And sometimes, if they start creating pills, which is what he said in my interview, that raises more red flags and creates more worry within Canadian authorities. But Canada has a major fentanyl crisis. I mean, more people died of fentanyl overdose deaths during the pandemic than they did of COVID. And the provincial health officer at that time, when she had her daily COVID press briefings, she cried about just the sheer amount of people who were suffering from this addiction and were dying, and were losing family members to this. And so the production and the trafficking and the consumption of fentanyl in Canada is a major issue. And the cartel plays a major role in that. And they're playing a major role in using Canada in a way as a proxy to get this stuff into the United States, because they know that that southern border has this big eye on them, and Big Brother is watching. Whereas in Canada, we, for the most part, have a pretty unsecured border. It's pretty under the radar. And, it actually just came out, I think this broke yesterday or the day before. A family was crossing into Canada from the United States illegally. And we have a lot of unprotected border, but obviously our weather doesn't really permit for a lot of crossings, because speaking of that, someone just died. It was, I think, a family of like 6 or 7. There were children with them, not even properly dressed for the weather. And someone died. They were trying to cross into Alberta, which is a prairie state in Canada, because the weather is very extreme. But I think that also the panic of people who are living undocumented in the US is also extreme. And these people are going to try to get into Canada. Yeah. Sorry, that was a very long-winded response. There's so much to talk about here. Everyone plays a role. And I also do think that the Canadian border, generally, what's going on and the flow of people and drugs goes significantly underreported. And it's really unfortunate, because it's affecting the lives of so many people, whether that's people who are dying of fentanyl overdose deaths, people who are losing family members to this, or people who are dying trying to cross into Canada. It's very tragic. And it really deeply upsets me.
Yeah, it's funny. We've done a lot of this podcast about the southern border. We haven't had too many talk about the northern border. So I just realized, like, you're a Canadian citizen. Like, let's ask you, and a journalist and someone who works on this same topic. So I'm glad I asked that question. And you know what? I almost think that in the next few weeks, we should circle back on the Canadian border focus 100% because we don't have any
For
episodes that
sure.
focus all on that.
And there isn't a lot of focus on that. And it just so happens that I'm, to my knowledge, really the only person who's Canadian and covering United States and Mexico relations and the cartel and the war on drugs. And so like I always like I'm like the NAFTA journalist because I can really speak to what's going on across both borders and this flow. And I have sources within Canadian border agencies and the American ones and the Mexican ones. And even actually just I spoke to a source within the Canadian border agency not that long ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and he was telling me that they're working on an operation that has to do with border agents being paid off in the United States and in Mexico to get people into Canada. And most of those people are actually going into the East Coast, which is interesting because the flow of fentanyl is coming from the West Coast of Canada. So, you're kind of being, it's there's no escape here. Both sides, yeah, exactly, are being um, uh, used as ports of entry or exit for something that's illegal, whether it's people or whether it's drugs.
Yeah, it's crazy. The Canadian border has a lot of drive-throughs where they just load up in a vehicle and they just drive across the border. It's like just drive across and then get out and run, whatever. But yeah, there's a lot
most of the people who are trafficking fentanyl from Canada into the United States are Canadian citizens and people who are very under the radar. You have housewives, you have, regular white collar workers, just people that you would never think are trafficking fentanyl, but who need extra money. And for a lot of people in Canada, money is very tight right now, especially since the pandemic. This has been a major issue. When I was still working at a newsroom in Canada, I did a report on just how many Canadians were using the food banks to supplement their groceries because they couldn't afford it. And these are people who are dual income households, maybe with like a kid or two. And their lives and their quality of life has been deeply impacted by the economy. And so it just created this increase of people who were willing to make extra money. And whether that was through nefarious means, so be it.
Just another question on Canada, just because I'm just curious. Was Trump's election have any effect on Russia? Excuse me, on Russia, on Canada, besides what we see recently on the news with Trudeau? Is there anything that it could potentially affect or has affected that people might be happy or upset about?
Well, certainly for trade, which was also why, he imposed the tariffs on Canada as well, because Canada and the U.S., they have a very strong trade relationship. Of course, Canada, the U.S., Mexico, NAFTA, it's called something else now. But basically, in essence, Trump's presidency will affect both neighboring countries and has been affecting both neighboring countries to, the nth degree.